Hey there, King of Kings family. Welcome into another episode of Beyond Sunday Sermons, the podcast where we take a Sunday message and just break it down a little bit further, get some extra insights, and get some extra voices to talk about them. And we are continuing our series right now called Favorite Verse, which I think has just been really, really cool in that we've gone to different staff members and just been like, hey, what's your life verse? You know, if you had to pick one verse from the Bible that you really feel like speaks to you personally or that you center your life around, what would that be? And that's created some cool discussions. Today we've got Caleb Haack. We get a chance to hear about his favorite verse. Caleb, first of all, tell us a little bit about your love of Vala's Pumpkin Patch, because I'm pretty sure you are the number one fan on staff.
I think this is a controversial topic right now because of just how expensive Vala's has gotten. That's where all the conversation's centered around now. But no, it's amazing. I grew up going there, and now we've got our baby that we go and we had to put her up to the measuring board, say she's this tall, and then if we go back in future years, it'll be cool to see how much taller she gets. But
if you go back right, you're going back.
Yeah.
Well, you guys got that season pass, so you can go 4 times a week.
We went 3 times, and then it got cold. So,
and it will probably remain cold for time going on. That was a good sentence, Mike.
Yeah.
What do you think? This is Mike White, by the way. He's the director of ministry here at King of Kings. What do you think about Vala's?
We moved here 10 years ago, and we said, what's unique to Omaha? And the one thing that came up was Vala's Pumpkin Patch. And so we didn't get it until we got here, and then it was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And so when the kids were younger, they're now 15 and 12, so they kind of go by themselves now, and that's fine. But when they were younger, it was super fun. And seeing them add new things every year, the chicken coop with the egg shooter stuff, that's a highlight.
The hard cider's the new thing, which is great.
Yeah, all right.
It's amazing. It's turned into a mini amusement park. I mean, they don't have the rides, but it's it's expanded so much.
They're adding rides now.
Are they really?
Yeah, they've got
this
I'm
a couple years behind.
Thing. Yeah, they've got a new scrambler thing. So
is Vala's sponsoring this episode?
They're totally sponsoring it.
They are now.
My favorite verse has everything to do with Vala's today. So.
We probably should get into the Bible a little bit here. So, Caleb, let's take a look at your favorite verse. It's actually 2 verses. 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14.
Yeah.
Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, do everything in love. That's the NIV version, which is important to note because we're going to talk about a different version coming up later in this conversation. But first, I just want to start at a high level. What is it about those verses that is important to you, that speaks to you?
Yeah, well, I picked those verses for my confirmation, which is funny because it was 16 years ago yesterday. And my mom sent me some pictures of that yesterday, and I was like, wow, well, that works out. So yeah, I mean, I grew up in the faith, and you get through it in the Lutheran faith, and then you go junior high you go into confirmation, and that's where you really profess your faith in front of the congregation. You learn through Luther's small catechism and everything, and you pick a life verse. So I picked this verse. I think I picked it because I was looking for a verse that talked about courage, because my name Caleb means courage, or that's one of the meanings. The other meaning we can get into later if you want. But I really liked that first part of it initially when I chose it. Stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. I think those are important things. But verse 14 is pretty short. Do everything in love, and that's the part that I think has really stuck with me. It's just speaking to how you want to live out your life and live out your faith, and what it means to do everything in love is super important. So yeah, that's really, really stuck with me through the years.
Mike, you're the king of context.
Oh boy.
Can you just give us a little bit of context about this letter? This is Paul's letter to the Corinthian church. What was going on at this time? Why is he writing to them? What's going on with the Corinthians?
Yeah, so Corinth was a big city. This is one of his longer epistles or just letters to churches. What we see, this is unique with Corinthians, I think, is he's referencing a letter they've already written to him. And so there's probably some other correspondence. So we have 2 recorded letters in Corinth, but there might have been 4, maybe more than that. I don't know if scholars really know or agree on that. Corinth was a metropolitan city, and the church was a mess. I mean, if you want to look at what not to do as a church, it's kind of First Corinthians letter, just division. There was a lot of other gods that they worshiped. And so you saw Christians kind of straddling the line of, yeah, I'm kind of in the Christian faith, but then I'm also in these temple worships and sacrifices and stuff like that. Division, sexual morality, they're called out in chapter 5, I think. It's just all throughout. And then kind of what's customary for Paul, his longer letters, he typically wraps with something like that, where it's almost this grab bag, collect all at the end, where he gives some shout outs to people, thanks people, encourages them, has some other theology at the end. But yeah, Corinthians both have that. Romans, you see Galatians, a smaller portion, but there's typically at the end of that. So that's kind of in this end of that.
I think what you just said is kind of interesting. I mean, it's very interesting, but you're talking about there's division, there's these outside temptations where Christians are kind of wavering a little bit. So it makes a lot of sense. Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, like stand firm, he's saying to them, like that's a reminder. But then do everything in love. That almost feels like a little bit of a separate component. Like all those first 4 phrases there all kind of like build upon each other, and then all of a sudden love comes in. What do you guys think about that? Why do you think Paul included that there?
Yeah, this feels like it. I mean, you kind of said it. This is his catch-all end of the letter, final instructions. He goes from talking about Apollos and who's going to visit, and then these 2 verses, which kind of sums up, I think, almost everything he's wanting to tell them. Yeah. And then he goes into these other people are visiting or go in different places, and so. Those are just really the summary of everything he wants the Corinthians to get from this letter. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, do everything in love, summarizes it all. So the stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. I think it's interesting because the other passage or the other version we were looking at too is really talking about like men, the leaders of the church, and then the do everything in love almost feels tacked on like, oh yeah, we'll do everything in love. So how can you be firm in the faith? How can you be on your guard? How can you have courage, but do that in a loving way?
Yeah. And I think further context, so it was a polytheistic society. And so it was normal to have temples for all the Greek gods. And what you would do is basically you were going to battle, then you would go to the temple of, I think it was Artemis, and you would just offer sacrifices there. And usually there was temple prostitutes and stuff there. So like you would go there for what you needed. And then so kind of what beauty, which I need obviously, but you would go to the temple of Aphrodite or whatever it might be, and you would offer sacrifices in hopes of beauty. And so they were normally just everyday life, go to whatever temple you had a felt need for. And so like you were saying, that the stand firm, it's like, this is it. Watch, be on your guard. Watch what's going around in society. We're calling you to one faith. So it was a vast departure from the culture in Corinth at the time.
Caleb, you referenced briefly there the other translation that we want to talk about today, and that's the ESV version. Again, I'll read the NIV, and then we can compare it to the ESV. So the NIV, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, do everything in love. The ESV says, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, let all that you do be done in love. What do you guys think about the differences there? What stands out?
Yeah, so the difference in translations is interesting to me always, because the NIV is more of a kind of thought for thought translation, whereas the ESV is definitely more word for word. So it's more likely, Paul used the word for men, act like men. And that's the real difference we see here, is that, well, is he talking to just the men in the town, or is he talking to everyone? And I mean, it was a patriarchal society, so the men were kind of the leaders, but you don't always think of men as, these loving people, right? We tend to be a little bit more, aggressive or
hard-edged,
hard. And so let all that you do be done in love. How is that acting like a man? How do men show love? I think that's what's really interesting to me about that translation. How do we show love?
Yeah. Be like men, act like men. It's kind of a cool, and I don't fully know like what it was back then to be a man. I couldn't give you, I think I know growing up for me, there were these false images of what being a man was, and it was tough, and it was lacking emotion, and it was, always confident and you never admit wrong. And it was like, there's just this false perception of what it means to be a man. And so I think being a man in this couple of verses, there's strength, but there's gentleness married together. I think you see Jesus with that, where he has bold truth, but he has grace and he has compassion. It's like this perfect mix. So I know for me in my journey as a Christian man, I've had to reorient what it means to be a man in culture. I don't know if you guys resonated with that or dealt with that at all.
Yeah, I think for me, like when I think of be a man, it's easy to think like, into sports or into, manly things or hunting or I don't know what it is. And but I've really started to equate it with more humility and versus, being the more aggressive or person who's taking charge or leading. But like, how can you lead from a posture of humility? And when you're doing that, how is that like showing love to others? And as we lead and as we spend time with our families or with our friends, like it's important for us to recognize like, we do have leadership qualities in different areas, but like everyone's important. We're all, children of God and loving one another in that way is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in our Western society, I think that the concepts of act like men and do everything in love are not synonymous. I think act like men is more so be self-sufficient. Like you said, Mike, kind of don't be emotional. Be level-headed, be firm. And some of those are good qualities. But when you think of do everything in love, if you are treating other people respectfully, like so many of those things that we associate with manliness, they can be, part of do everything in love as well. And I think I didn't recognize this growing up, but my dad is just a great example. Just the way that he treats my mom, the way that he treated us kids, that he treated the people around him. I mean, was everything that he did done in love? Maybe not, but that's the case for anyone. And I think, being able to look at people's lives who you admire and say, that's what, authentic manhood looks like. I think if you really examine their lives, you see that they try to live out 1 Corinthians 16:14 as well as they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that really speaks to the question, like, well, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. I don't know. But,
Oh boy, we're going there.
How do we love, and what does it mean really to love? How do I show that love? And so I was looking at kind of the Greek language that was used in this letter, and the word love he uses is agape, which I think we talk about probably the most is the highest form of love. And there's actually 8. Mike thought there was 4, but there's 8.
You corrected me. Yeah.
There's 8 Greek words for love. And so agape is the selfless, godly love. So that's the one that Paul is telling us we need to do everything with a selfless, godly love. And my thought when I was, re-looking at this verse as my favorite verse was, well, like, everything I do in one way or another is kind of an act of love or an act of worship, really. It's either like I'm loving myself or I'm loving others or I'm loving God in some way. Everything I do is probably falling into one of those categories. But what Paul is saying is do everything with that selfless, godly love.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. So you think everything you do is out of love. Define love.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So the love in the way of, like you think of maybe self-love or selfish love almost. It's all about me. What am I doing to, make myself look better or take care of myself or put myself first? That might be a kind of love. And some of these other ones, self-love, the Greek word philatia is like that's a love, a word for love that they had. So everything does something in that way. They've got like mania, obsessive love. The other ones we talk about, philia, affectionate love. Eros is the romantic or passionate love. Storge, familiar love. So there's all these different types of love. So that's the way that I look at it is like, okay, I'm loving in these different ways. And then you want to look at, okay, well, what's the most important out of that? How does God love me? And you want to show that love to others. in a way that it's giving of yourself. And I don't always do that.
Right.
Nobody can always do that. Jesus was the only perfect person, and he showed that kind of love. So we need to model our love after him, and our love isn't always like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's good. I think if there's probably a healthy and unhealthy, so we might use the word love,
Right.
but
Yeah.
maybe what's at the center of my decisions, and it could be healthy versus, like you said, selfish love. I'd probably that's almost an oxymoron.
It kind of is, yeah.
right there. So it's like, yeah, that's not really love, but it's putting me at the center,
Right.
and it could be in a healthy way, it could be in an unhealthy way. But the ideal is that agape, that unconditional, self-sacrificial,
Yeah.
and that's what Jesus showed.
that's what Jesus did 100%. You know, when he would give his life
Yeah.
for us,
Right.
that's the ultimate act
Yeah.
of
Yep.
unselfish
Yeah.
love.
Yep.
And, you know, that's what faith is all about. And so when we're told to, you know, do everything in love, I don't know that I would sacrifice myself for you, Mike. I don't
Ouch.
know.
That hurts, man.
But that's what Jesus does for us. And
Yeah.
and you want to get to that point where you're willing to give everything to follow Jesus.
That's cool. You said something earlier. I was reading through this morning, and he kind of gives his shout outs, and there's some familiar names of Apollos. You see Apollos referenced in, I think it's chapter 3. He was a pastor, church planner in Corinth also. But then later on, and this is where the Christian faith broke the mold. You see in verse 19, Priscilla and Aquila, who were huge leaders in the early church, very wealthy, had a house church. They actually ran the church, I believe, but very big supporters. So it's kind of cool that you see them shouted out in verse 19 and kind of that closing chapter. But it's fascinating when you dig into each of these people a little bit more. And then even we had in one of our sermons, I think it was the all in on giving that I did, where if you look at the beginning of it, they're talking about the collection for God's people. And so that was the Macedonian churches in 2 Corinthians 8. They're taking a collection for the Jerusalem Christians. So like you just see all the Bibles just interwoven together. So, like we might see it as a standalone letter, but it goes into Acts and it goes into 2 Corinthians and it goes like you just see it all throughout.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah, and Paul's spreading this message to all these people, and
Yes.
they're taking it and
Yes.
they're doing their missionary work,
Right.
you know, with these words in their mind.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's cool.
it's good.
I think, you know, we're talking so much about love right now. Probably some of the most well-known verses about love are also in this letter, a couple chapters before in 1 Corinthians 13. I mean, if you've been to a wedding, you've heard many of these verses. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, you know, yada, yada. Love never fails. Just looking through all of 1 Corinthians 13, and then knowing that Paul is going to say, do everything in love at the end of his letter, a couple chapters later, it's almost like he drops this truth bomb on him. Yeah. And then at the end, he's like, hey, that thing that I told you about love, that's really important. Maybe go back and read that again.
Yeah.
I was serious about that. Yeah. That's definitely some of the most used passages on love right there. And you just think again about like, what was the Corinthian church really struggling with? You know, we don't know what their questions to Paul were necessarily, but we get the answers, and he's talking about love. So they weren't loving well. They were taking love and doing things that they thought were maybe love in a different way, but he gives them the reminder of this is what love really is. It's patient, it's kind. Love doesn't end. You know, it endures all things, hopes all things. It goes on.
Yeah, they twisted that. I think that kind of goes back to that selfishness we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And you see it, I mean, chapter 5 is interesting where I think he's sleeping with like his mother-in-law or something.
Wait,
and
who's he here?
They don't name
One
him,
of the
thankfully.
leaders of the church.
Yeah,
Okay,
one of the
okay.
leaders in the church.
I was
but
going to
it's
say,
like,
are we
stop
talking about
being
we're talking about
admonished,
doing
yeah.
this. And I don't think we don't know the exact size of this church, but it probably wasn't like King of Kings huge where you're 1,000 people. I mean, you're probably 50, and you know
people knew each
everyone.
other's business.
More
yeah.
like a house church.
And you're living
yeah.
right next to families, and you're
Yeah.
breaking bread, and you're doing life together.
They knew everything
They
that was
knew
happening,
everyone
yeah.
that he's referencing. And then it's like the Lord's Supper. It's like stop getting drunk and doing communion this way. Like what's going on? So yeah, Paul reorients, and I would say too. Yeah, I've been to a number of weddings, and Corinthians 13's almost always there. It applies to marriage, but that's not the context in which Paul's writing it. If you look at chapter 12, it's like one body, many parts. So the church is what he's talking about with this love. we can take it and apply it to marriage. I think it's true, but he's just saying that the church is a unique community of believers that functions this way. So that's where love is patient, love is kind. You're walking with one another. There's truth, there's humility, there's love that comes together in that great community.
I think you make a great point there, Mike. And as Sarah and I, my wife, as we were kind of preparing for marriage, we really centered in on 1 Corinthians 16:14. Like that was our verse, do everything in love. And I actually have that inscribed on the middle of my wedding ring here. And our thinking was just, if we, as impossible as this is, if we can strive to do everything we do, everything we think is about loving the other person, we can't fail. Like that's the bedrock of a successful marriage. And I think that you're definitely right, Mike, and that these verses extend beyond marriage. This isn't Paul just saying, hey, husbands and wives, do everything to each other in love. He's saying it to everyone. But I think that marriage provides, a great example in that, yeah, I screw up and I do things that make Sarah mad or disappoint her. But for the most part, I want to do things that make her happy. I don't buy flowers for anyone else, but I'll buy flowers for Sarah because I love her. And that's an act of love, things like that. And if we can apply that to other people in our lives, it looks different for each person. The way that I love you, Mike, is different than the way that I would love my mom. But if we act towards each other in love, like that's how we build this thing. That's how we get non-Christians looking at us and being like, what's different about those people? Who's this Jesus guy that they're following?
Yeah. And if you think about marriage, you're what, 4 years coming up? Yeah, you're 5-ish.
We're almost 5.
Almost 5.
5 in March.
So we were 20 in August. And I just think I'm so radically different now than I was 20 years ago. And man, selfishness is death to a marriage. And so I know there are seasons of that, trying to grow out of that, grow up, maturing, becoming humble, hearing your spouse. And for me, it's, you guys know me pretty well, but like I'm very, very logical. And so I can build my case and be right pretty quickly or defend myself. And so what I had to learn early in marriage was I would sacrifice the relationship to be right. And it was dangerous. And so then it's like, again, what's my motivation here? It's to be right, not to hear Liz's heart and work through something together.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. That's my wisdom, humility, my favorite quality in people. And I don't know how a marriage can be successful if you don't have humility.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and leading in marriage from a position of leading in faith too.
Yeah.
Like we have this opportunity to lead our families in faith and do that in a loving way. And right now, we just had our baby and she's 4 months old now. And it's so easy for me to be like, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to do the chores, or I don't want to help out in a different way. Like, but being sacrificial in my love is really giving, and that's what's going to give life to our marriage. And then when I look at that too, like we were talking about with other people who maybe we're not close with, or if somebody else has a need and we need to serve them too, it's how can I sacrifice and love in that way?
Yeah. Made me think of Ephesians 5. I think it's a controversial section, but it talks about wives submit to your husbands, and we just stop there and people are irate about the word submit. It's like, whoa. Just like read the context, get into it a little bit more. Like Christian marriage was actually really unique in the culture where it was definitely equality between, but then go to 25. It says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So it's like, okay, we get stuck on the word submission, but keep going. And husbands, you're called to die continually for your wife.
Well, you think about how Jesus loved and how he lived and how he submitted to his Father in heaven.
Yep.
And he's there in the garden asking God, take this cup from me. Like, if it's your will, I will do it, but I don't want to die. I don't want to sacrifice like that. And nobody does. I don't know that Jesus necessarily would say he didn't want to, but like, he's like, balancing that. How do I do this love that's the ultimate sacrifice? And that's what he does for us. And if Jesus can sacrifice for us and we're supposed to follow his example, like how can we love others?
Yeah. And that's that transformation. I think you're right in the garden. I mean, yeah, it's interesting to think that he obviously wanted to, but I think he realized the gravity and weight of it in that moment, but that sacrifice is huge. And then I think I was going back to identity. So because of Christ's love for us, we have new identity. And that's what you see Paul goes back to it in his letters a lot, and he goes back to like, as dearly loved children of God, therefore act this way. So it's like, it's always going back to identity that informs behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
Real good stuff, guys. I mean, we just hit on a lot of topics, a lot of good stuff about love. As we wrap up here, is there anything else about 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14 that you want to hit on, or maybe something? I mean, obviously we've touched on a lot of really good stuff, I think, so far today, but is there anything that you would just really hope that someone listening or watching to this takes away from it, and that's their takeaway for the day?
Yeah, I think also the be strong. Like, it's just one simple phrase, be strong. Where does our strength come from? You know, does it come from internally? Is it myself? Am I providing the strength? Or, you know, as he talks about, stand firm in the faith, be on your guard, be courageous. Like, those are qualities we get from God. And so our strength comes from God. Our ability to love comes from God. God is love, right? So we want to be able to take that and have the strength to love in that humble, godly, selfless way.
Yeah. Two thoughts. I think as I've matured and grown in my knowledge of the word, my relationship with the Lord, I think Christianity is an internal relationship that then drives the external, if that makes sense. I think as a kid, I flipped those. And so it was kind of this behavior modification where you like look and perform a certain way, but I was trying on my own power. And so I think when you dig into scripture, it's an internal transformation. We talk about we transform lives, the King of Kings, right? So there's a heart change that then drives your behavior. And then second thing, shout out to Vala's Pumpkin Patch one more time. Your kettle corn kills it. So I love it. That's all I got today.
Nice.
I don't know if there's a better way to end it than that. King of Kings family, let's keep living our lives beyond Sunday.